tonight's theme is regenerative farming and sustainable food production. And we've got some really great speakers who are pioneers in the field to come and talk to us tonight. We're going to start the evening with Kat and Simon Ball, who come from Puddleditch Vending, or Puddleditch Farm, down near Berkeley, so they are very local. And they run a really truly diverse farming enterprise. They've got cattle and sheep and bees, and a no-dig market garden as well. And on top of all that, Simon also is the manager at Tortworth Farm Shop, so if any of you go up there, you may have seen him around there. And Kat is also a beef vet, and she has a special expertise in parasiticides, which I just can't say. But anyway, the things that kill parasites in both sort of livestock and our domestic animals as well. So she might just talk a little bit about that as well. So they're going to talk probably until about 8:15. And then we're going to have a short break when you can go to the bar and buy another drink, or go to the loo. The toilets are out at the front, if you haven't found them already. And then we're going to come back, and Jake Freestone's going to talk to us. Jake is from Overbury Estate, which is up just northeast of Tewkesbury, and he runs a large-scale mixed enterprise of arable and livestock. And Jake's been a pioneer in many of the key aspects of regenerative farming, such as cover crops and direct drilling. So if you don't know what those are now, then hopefully by the end of the evening you will. I think probably many of us have read quite a lot about regenerative farming in the press, got a bit of an idea of what it's all about. You might be aware that there are 5 sort of key cornerstones to regenerative farming. But I think what I'm hoping tonight is going to give us is a much more practical idea about what that actually means on the ground, what it means for farmers, and where they see the regenerative movement going in the future. So I'm going to hand over to Simon and Kat.
Thank you, Belle. Thank you, everybody. It's lovely to be here and see quite a few faces I recognise from the farm shop. So thank you very much, firstly, for supporting us at the farm shop. This is Catherine, my wife. Brief introduction. Catherine and I met through Young Farmers. I was the chairman, and Catherine was coming as a vet student to a local university, and I showed her the rest of the way. So there you go. We met through Young Farmers, as I said. We soon hit it off. We've been very ambitious together in everything we've done, and we support each other wholly in everything we do. We're very lucky to have 2 children, Freddie at 6 and Percy at 3, who are wild around our farm, and are lucky enough to grow up as we grew up, both of us, on farms. We both come from conventional farms. My parents' farm in Charfield, beef and sheep, about 800 acres. And Catherine's parents were dairy farmers over in Monmouthshire. They have since stopped the dairy and do beef now. But our aim was always to get a farm of our own, and we've managed to achieve that finally. It's taken quite a few attempts of trying to rent, trying to buy even, but we were lucky enough to get an opportunity from Gloucestershire County Council and Puddleditch Farm down at Berkeley Heath, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second if you like.
This was me in the top corner there, showing very high index pedigree Holsteins, so as sort of extreme as the dairy cow can get, housed all year round, milked 3 times a day in quite an intensive system. Me and my dad did that over in Monmouth while and before I was at Bristol Vet School. And then came along the 2 boys in the picture. I still vet 3 days a week, so I've been doing that for 12 years now, and I'm really passionate about the care of young stock. So really focused in on the dairy replacement heifer. That's a massive financial outlay for the dairy farmers, but also massive in the carbon footprint of farms as well. So that's partly what brought me into the sort of sustainability world from the sort of work aspect. And then, as Simon said, in 2020, when the whole world got taken over by COVID, I was on maternity leave and decided the best use of my time was to fill in farm applications. So that's how we managed to get Puddleditch. So
prior to getting Puddleditch, I came back to my parents' family farm as to set up a diversification, which was taught at the State Farm shop. I was fortunate enough, as Jake has been, to have had been awarded a Nuffield Farming Scholarship back in 2009. I chose the subject of the marketing of food and education of consumers, and I was lucky enough to travel around the world for 18 months, looking at farm shops, visiting producers, and getting lots of inspiration to bring back to my own. Tortworth Farm Shop is now 20 years on this year, and we've just signed another 10-year tenancy, so we look to be here for the next 10 years. We've just had a little bit of a revamp in the farm shop. The family and the staff have all put a lot of effort into that, and a few extra hours. The aim was to direct market my dad's own beef at the time, which we do. A couple of beef animals a week we would put through the farm shop, along with about 6 to 10 of our own lambs as well. But Catherine and I have always wanted to produce, and me especially, our own food and direct market it and sell it through the farm shop. And so, along with bringing up the boys on the farm, that's why we took on Puddleditch Farm. And so, being new farmers, we had the wonderful opportunity to start afresh, really. We're not stuck in our ways. We're not following our parents' roles and methods of farming. We were able to take up new methods of farming. I'm very much passionate about wildlife and the British countryside, food and farming. They are my passions in life. I've done a lot of volunteering for places like Slimbridge, Wetland and Wildfowl Trust, and so I'm very conscious of the biodiversity on the farm, improving it, retaining it, and seeing what we can do in our short tenure tenancy to transition the farm from a conventional grass, mowing grass dairy farm to a varied mixture of grassland and biodiversity, and that's what we're trying to achieve at Puddleditch.
On to the cows, as we said, we are trying to do the idea of enterprise stacking to minimise the risks of just focusing on one area, but also to add to the diversity we have from a business point of view, as well as the true sort of biodiversity aspect. So to start with was cows. This is massively sort of my passion. When me and my dad decided to sell the dairy herd, it was Angus's we focused on. I liked showing quite a lot of the time, so they do quite well in the show ring. Obviously, Simon with the butchery side of it, Angus's have got that sort of well-known name and brand, so that's what we went with. However, as you can see in the picture, there are some unusual Angus's in there because we do have pedigree black and red Angus's. So worldwide, there are actually more reds in the world. They are said to deal with the heat better, particularly sort of around that Central America and sort of Australia, but in the UK it's still deemed to be the black Angus is the most common, but we run both lines. So why did we pick them? They're meant to be easy care. It obviously depends on how much of a control I put into it a little bit, but they do well. They are really good at growing and finishing on grass. So that's a good aspect from a regenerative side of it, but also from a nutritional point, us wanting to bring up our family, but also offer a nutritiously dense product with those higher sort of omega-3s compared to your 6s from that grass finished animal as well. So that's part of the reasons we went for the Angus's and running them on a mob grazing basis. So really quite tightly packed into little paddocks but moved every day. So this really encourages the grass to be as efficient as possible. So it gets a long rest period to regrow, but then they do properly eat it right down and then they're moved on the next day. It's good for the grass and good for the animals. So we get a range of species, or that's what we're aiming to get towards as the grasses and the soils change. So we can get more of those forbs or herbs growing in there. So that helps from a drought tolerance point of view because they have those deeper roots. Also from a minerals point of view that the animals need, from a veterinary health point of view, we want to make sure that's circulating within the soil, within those deep-rooted plants. And also some of the pluses of the tannins within some of these plants are said to sort of help the animals with their resilience to parasites. So that's why we try and do this idea of mob grazing. So they do look quite tight in a corner of a field, but then the next day they'll be onto this fresh salad bar of a new paddock exactly the next day.
And it is just that, and it's really enjoyable to go out and walk through the cows every day and let them run onto fresh grass every day. You can see the health and the vitality in the animals. They're all healthy and well. They are getting a good mixture in this salad bar of legumes and herbal vegetation, which is doing wonders to the soil. They're also spreading the manure quite evenly and quite densely, and the urine, across the fields, which helps to add the nutrient. In an ideal world, we wouldn't regraze the same cell for up to about 90 days. And that ideal world is the ideal world of the wild flower, really, allowing it to come to flower, to set seed, and to regenerate itself. We haven't quite got a big enough farm to be able to get to 90 days of leaving a single cell ungrazed. We can get to 60 days sometimes. And some wildflowers will set seed and regenerate in that time, but not all. But the growth of the vegetation is young and lush and not overly stalky. And it's a really good, nutritious source for our cattle. It gives them really shiny coats. They do well. And as I say, we are grass-finished meat, so we don't add any concentrate grain at all to our animal from Puddleditch Farm. That said, we can't necessarily finish finished beef particularly well because we have a slight shortage of grass. So our better market for our cattle is to sell them as younger cattle onto somebody else that can either continue if they've got larger quantities of fodder on the grass-based diet, or they could add grain into the diet, and our animals would soon fatten up quite quickly on a bit of a grain diet. But what we put through our own business is solely grass-fed. We do buy in straw. We have to buy in straw for bedding, and we do have to buy in surplus hay and a little bit of silage just because we're only on 80 acres. And as we are trying to transition into a more regenerative way of livestock farming, we're not able to really add any fertilizers, or we've chosen not to add any fertilizers and weed control, should I say, onto the land. And because we're not adding any nitrogen, any fertilizers to our grass, we don't grow huge, great, luscious grass. We have to sort of make do with what we've got a little bit, and that's been a very steep learning curve in the last 2 or 3 years. That, along with the pressures of where we are, the Berkeley Vale is quite heavy clay, gets very wet. When you've got 40 cows and their calves running around in a tight cell and the ground is wet, you can soon damage the ground. Along the fence lines particularly. We've actually brought our cattle in now because the ground is too wet outside for our cattle in the Berkeley Vale, and a lot of people have now this time of year. So we've got to keep an eye on that we're not all the good work we're doing by overseeding with herbal lays and managing the grass, that we're not then ruining it, and it can be ruined in a day if the cattle are trampling it and sort of making an absolute quagmire of the ground. So it's really tricky to do that. We haven't got acres and acres to be able to turn them out on and do anything. We've got 80 acres. We've actually got 1 cow per acre, which is a very dense stocking ratio compared to a lot of farms. You would visit many farms that are on 1 cow per 5, 6, 7 plus acres across the whole farm. So to achieve that, I feel quite pleased that we're doing it and we're just surviving. But we have had to decide to market our own beef direct as well from the farm to be able to help recoup some of the costs really in doing that, and that's why we've set up our vending.
So that's a bit about the Angus there. So to add to the range, I guess with the direct selling, range is really important. We've gone with the sheep as well, and this was something we had before with the Millennium Blues breed, which is relatively new as the name suggests, but it is quite a intense breed, I guess, and very commercial in that it's a Beltex ram, so the very extreme double-muscled ram, but on a more milky ewe. So again, these can follow the cows through the paddock system, In theory, they should go ahead of the cows, but trying to keep them in with electric fences we find is a challenge until the shearing day. So generally, if they go behind, then they won't mix into the cows, and then they don't want to go back to where there's no food. So it works for us and for parasites. They do graze in a slightly different way, sheep. So again, we're trying to manage the grassland with different animals instead of different sort of vehicles and tractors in a way. So the sheep seem to work for us from a range of products point of view, as well as trying to add that diversity and sort of grassland management. But they do bring challenges, and keeping them in is one, definitely through the summer. But also, obviously, parasites in sheep is a massive challenge. There is multi-resistance. We've taken on a farm that luckily hadn't had much sheep on it, so was relatively clean from that point of view, but are very careful in how we are monitoring that with regular weights and regular fecal samples. And 2 years ago we did manage to finish all the lambs without any parasiticide use, which is rare, but the weather was on our side, whereas this year, with it being a lot wetter, we have had to use it, but it's been selective, and I think it's worked well. But each season is different, so we just have to take it a year at a time and just go with what the animals are trying to show us, really, and go with their welfare as well as the sort of profitability sort of aspects with the sheep.
And the lambs do finish off of grass very well, actually, so we haven't got to add any concentrate to them, and we can create the final product and market the final product with our sheep. One of the other things we're trying not to do is, or we're trying to reduce, is the impaction on the ground. We haven't got much big equipment. We don't need it on our farm. I'm lucky enough to come from farming families that we can borrow equipment if we need to. But we're not ploughing. I do chain harrow the grounds just to chain harrow out the manure pats and things like that. We do cut the hedges, but we only cut half of the hedges each year on the farm, leaving half for the wildlife for the winter. And I made a bit of a rookie mistake this year, I must admit. I borrowed my father's hedge trimmer. I went out in a bit of a rush because I only had 2 days. My brother was on holiday and I could borrow the hedge trimmer. And I cut the same hedges that were cut last year, which my brother did. So that's fine. But next year, my hedge growth will be 3 years old, and my dad's hedge cutter is going to take a little bit of wear and tear getting through that. But the wildlife will surely benefit this Christmas with plenty of berries and cover. So I can't believe I did that. So low impaction, less tractors on the ground. We spend most of our days walking around the farm. We have a rotor-rainer dirty water system where the water is collected off the yard into a slurry lagoon, and it's pumped out to a water spinner on the field, so we don't have to go out with dung spreaders and tractors. And so really, to be honest, our farm, we wouldn't be able to drive on it from the end of October through to March anyway, because it would just cause too much damage. So we do spend a lot of time walking the fences, moving electric fences and things like that. So no till for us is no ploughing the ground. Leaving half of the hedgerows long for each winter is part of the regeneration. Overseeding with herbal lays, a mixture of legumes and herbs. I think in the Cotswold seed mix, I think it's about 26 different species. We came to Puddleditch Farm, and it was just 3 varieties of a mowing grass used for the previous farmer's dairy. This mowing grass grows very fast, very quickly with nitrogen, but once it's cut off to the ground, there's no root, there's no permanent pasture underneath that, and so in any foot square there would only be a few plants of grass. When our cattle grazed that down for the first time, we virtually had no grass left straight away, and we were frightened stiff of what we'd done. So we had to get some more species into that mix, and I adjusted the herbal lay mix that we had, and we added more permanent pasture grasses in to hopefully build that. And now we're sort of in the 3rd year now. The pasture has started to improve. We've got a denser cover of pasture on the ground, and that is protecting the soil and protecting all the wildlife and biodiversity in it. I've always been a passionate market garden gardener, and both grandparents were market gardeners. So I helped out all my life growing fruit and veg. I wanted to carry on growing fruit and veg in my own small way. And we've got a couple of polytunnels. We've grown loads of tomatoes, loads of vegetables, a lot of which I've put through Tortworth Farm Shop this last couple of years, but we also sell it through our vending. We use the no-dig method, which is we don't... Only 6 years ago, I bought a lovely brand new rotavator, and I've never used it since we've moved on to Puddleditch Farm. But lots of cardboard boxes left over from the farm shop, local green waste from Thornbury, and manure. What we did is we went out to the patch we wanted to call our market garden. We cut the grass back slightly. We layered it with cardboard. We then put some well-rotted cow manure on that because we had access to it. Then we had green waste compost, which actually came from Wotton Farm in Thornbury. There were concerns about that, about residuals of gardeners' pesticides and herbicides and things like that. We left it over the winter to dissipate, and we have grown in that. We have topped that up with homemade compost in year 2, and will be this winter as well. But we've grown directly into that lasagna layer that we've created, and I tell you, the fruit and veg has absolutely flourished in it, better than if I'd tilled the garden over the winter and covered it in cow manure. I'd be a strong advocate on no-dig market gardening. If you put your hand down into the soil, it's quite soft, and you will bring out loads of earthworms and loads of beetles. There's loads and loads of life in the soil, and you can see that in the plants that grow, and they're full of nutrition, and they're sort of high-density plants as well. So that is one element of the garden, and to complement that, we've also got about 6 beehives. It's a bit of a hobby I've always fancied having a go at. I am by no means an expert, and I've made some mistakes, and it's all a steep learning curve. But in year 1, we were able to produce about 120 jars of honey. Year 2 was an absolute failure, and I just managed to keep the bees alive, and we'll be going into the 3rd year now. But really enjoy that. The benefits to the market garden are huge for the pollination, and we also planted about 50 fruit trees around the market garden. But to walk out into the herbal lays when you're seeing the cattle and see the bees and see everything, it's a real joy, and it's one of the privileges and pleasures of having a farm, really, and being a custodian of the countryside. So honeybees, market garden, and beef and sheep. We've got some chickens, poultry for eggs as well, which we sell for our vending shop, but that's our little enterprises we've stacked up at Puddleditch.
So as Simon said, we are there in the Berkeley Vale, so it is heavy clay, and compaction was one of the biggest things we were trying to fight against, and it's quite a easy thing to definitely get sucked into, and I think both of our parents have suggested it many a time, to just get some of their big kit and to just go through and aerate it, and it would be a very quick result, which it would, but we know from experience that, you know, within a few months it would be back to the same place that it's at. So from a long-term point of view, what benefits would it be? So we're trying to combat it with that range of root depths and with the overall soil health, with the cattle and sheep sort of naturally manuring it and trying to bring it back to life that way. More with sort of my veterinary hat on, I do quite a lot of veterinary and farmer training and trying to get them a bit more engaged with soil health. So the first person obviously I have to train are the kids, because if I can train them to do it, I've got a chance. So that's us going out worm hunting, as we call it, just digging it out, roughly 20 to 30 centimetres, so spade sort of cubes, and trying to divide up how many worms you have of different layers and different life stages. So it's not all about the size of your worms, it's all about if they have that saddle, so that extra sort of ridge around a third of the way down the body, that tells them if they are sexually mature, so adults, which are the ones we want to be counting. So that's one of the things. And also there, one of my other sort of hobbies, I guess you'd call it, is dung beetles. So one of our key species to really tell a lot about the overall diversity, and they're relatively easy to catch because they're not particularly quick, so I can manage with those ones. So yeah, you work your way through the dung pats, finding these dung beetles. And then there's sort of 3 major groups. So there's the ones that live within the pats, or the tunnelers. So the one in the lower picture there on Freddie's arm, they're roughly maybe up to 1 inch, and they're the tunnelers that really dig down into the soil, massively helping in aeration and spreading that nutrition from the pats, whereas the more common sort of dwellers that live within the patch are a lot smaller. But also on those, which I think is amazing, they have mites that sort of use them almost as a taxi service to go between the pats, and they're the ones that will actually eat a lot of that sort of nuisance fly maggots and other sort of worm, so the gut worms that we're trying to prevent happening within the livestock, and the mites will actually help lower that life cycle by controlling that. So that's why I spend a lot of time diving through muck. But hopefully we're finding some interesting things when we're doing it.
So this is our little vending. Back at the beginning of the year, I think it was only just before Christmas last year, we said, right, we're going to do it. We're going to do a vending shop. By January, I'd knocked around the shop, and by the end of January, we'd knocked together a shop. It took a few weeks for the vending lockers to arrive, because this style of vending locker is quite new in the country. We've got ambient ones, which are the ones on the white ones, and we've got refrigerated. The ambient come from Holland, the refrigerated come from Italy, and the frozen is still being developed and tested at the moment in this style of locker. This is a self-service touchscreen till. You can see the items in the locker. You swipe your items to the basket. Once your basket's full, you can go to checkout. There's a little contactless payment area. You scan your phone, your watch, or whatever it is, and the locker doors will pop open and you help yourself. And we leave you to it. We have had a couple of software issues and glitches, but I think we're over that now. Only minor, really. And as long as we've rectified the problem with a customer, it's all been good. For us, it's direct marketing off the farm and direct retail of our own produce, and we can retain more of the margin. And it's 5 minutes in the morning, opening the shop up, and it's about 20 minutes in the evening, restocking and closing the shop. So very, very minimal time, about half an hour tops a day that we would spend on the vending, because we work elsewhere and we've got other jobs to do. But we're gradually building our customer base, loyal, strong customers that are coming back. We like to think the quality of the product is right up there. It's high density, nutrient rich. We try to make it as competitively priced as possible, and I don't think we're too overpriced for what it is. And for anybody that wants to be able to support this style of farming, then this, not just ourselves, but this is one way that you can support us by purchasing at our farm shops and coming direct to the farm. I've got some little postcards if anyone wants to take one away in these directions.
So on top of that, sort of the marketing of the products is obviously the consumer education side of it, which is why we get involved with things like tonight. But also, as I said, with my vet hat on, these are some of the courses that I run for vets to try and support their farmers, so their clients, to try and make more sustainable choices, which often is a challenge when you're in that sort of hamster wheel of the business, and with cash flows being as tight as particularly the milk industry's in at the moment. So they're often run at Puddleditch, sort of the morning being more on the theory of how sort of regenerative ag can work in most systems, and then in the afternoon we're out moving the cows, finding some dung beetles and finding some worms. And then we do things like the school projects.
We've been very lucky enough to be involved with a couple of different things. The beginning of the year we had Talk with Primary School come on a private visit to the farm for a day with a couple of classes of children, which is so inspiring and enjoyable to have children on the farm. It really is. They came for a day. They went away and did a project over the course of a couple of weeks, and they came back to the farm shop to look at the butchery and how the products were retailed. So they had a 2-part visit, Talk with School. But we've got involved as the first farm in Gloucestershire to hold a Kingfisher Project event, which is a Southwest sort of directive, encouraging year 7s and 8s, or 6 and 7, sorry, out of primary schools to have half a day on a farm. And we were lucky enough to have 3 different schools local schools come to our farm. It didn't take a great deal of work for anybody out there that's farming and feels a bit nervous about inviting children onto the farm. Health and safety was a big issue, obviously, but once we got all those boxes ticked, the day was so enjoyable. The kids were so inquisitive, and you could see that they were learning so much and asking some of the most amazing questions, and some of them had some of their own stories that were just so enjoyable to listen to. So they came round and we took them round sweep netting, butterflies and insects and things like that. We went worm counting and looking at dung beetles, and we went into the market garden where they got to plant a bean and taste some vegetables and things like that. And the schools went away and did a project, and they came back for a picnic on the farm, all the schools together with all the teachers, and presented their project. And there was a lovely little Kingfisher award that was given to the winning school, which was was it Stone? It was Stone, wasn't it? And I think it was really beneficial. I've spoken to the head teacher since, and they said the kids have talked so much about their school visit and what have you. And so we'll definitely be doing that again. I don't think we can do it every year, but we would encourage others to do it. And we are open to discussions, to groups, to vets, and to the schools coming onto our farm and sharing our knowledge and trying to broaden other people's knowledge and educate as best we can.
So yeah, just bringing it back, I guess, in the opening slide was the sort of 5 areas of regenerative farm from Groundswell, which is a great day out if anyone wanted to really go into it. But I think the one I use for mine is really emphasising that whole idea of mindset, because as a vet, I travel. Why I love vetting in the UK is I can go to a super intensive dairy in the morning, and then almost the other end of the scale, maybe an organic, block carver in the afternoon. Totally different ambitions of what they want their cows to achieve. Totally different, housing systems. But actually, both of them can be regenerative. It's all about their mindset and their whole approach to it. That whole idea of the holism, so the holistic thinking of how we can problem solve. So I think we have to be aware that trying to sort of picture what regenerative farming is can be quite a challenge. I think within the industry there's a lot of arguments of is it the right term and what do the buyers think of it. But I think it's more that actually a lot of farming systems can adapt any of their systems to make a step in the right direction, which is definitely where we want to be going.
And that is it. So we'll certainly take questions after Jake's spoken at the end, and we'll be around to talk to anybody who wants to chat to us.
I'd like to introduce Jake Freestone, who, as I mentioned, comes from Overbury Estate. Jake has won a whole clutch of awards this year, which I'm just going to quickly run through. He's won the BBC Food and Farming Award for the Future of Farming, which is part of collaboration that perhaps you might tell us a little bit about. He's won the Caroline Drummond Award for Innovation and Communication. And he's won the Nuffield Farming Scholarship Bullock Award, which is for the farmer that has made the most of their Nuffield Scholarship 10 years on, or over a period of 10 years. So he's, clearly knows a lot of what he's talking about. But what I really like was I noticed that his strapline is probably out sniffing soil. So I guess we're going to learn a bit about soil as well.
Thank you, Belle. Thank you very much, everybody. Yes, that's normally what I'm doing. You've probably got most of it under my fingernails, actually. It's a passion I've developed only over the last sort of 10 years, coming from quite a commercial farming background into a much more regenerative system as a result of my Nuffield Farming Scholarship, actually. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, talk to you a bit about the farm, what we do, how we do it, some of the changes we've made, because I think that's important. It is a journey, and we're always learning. We'll never get to the end of this. The more we learn, the more we realise we don't know enough. For instance, there is more species in a teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. And that's just phenomenal, and we know nothing about them. So soil is really important. I'm in a really lucky position at Overbury. It's a great farm. It's really diverse. Won a few awards along the way. Nuffield has been a massive change in my life for lots of different reasons. It's given me a lot of confidence, a lot of opportunity. I travelled across the world. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. But I just want to start with the farm. Actually, I'm the only person in the country, I'm not being too big-headed, who has won the Food and Farming Award twice. So I won it once on my own last year, and then once again with 3 other farming friends of mine, which I'm going to talk to you a bit about in a minute, because we're setting up a business. We have set up a business that is going to be quite interesting, I hope. So the farm. Breeden Hill. No Breeden Hill. Junction 9 off the M5. That's where we are, 1,000 feet above sea level on the top, Cotswold brash, really thin soil, 6-8 inches, and then we're onto a massive lump of limestone, which is it's free draining, but there's very little soil up there. We farm for the Holland Martin family. They've had that farm and that estate in their ownership and control since 1723. And Penelope said to me when I first started there, which was in 2003, that we need to improve this and make it better for the next 300 years. So that's quite a challenge for a young farm manager. At the time, I like to think I still am. So that's the in-house farming bit. Then we also do some contract farming with a neighbour on another, just actually 207 hectares now. It's just slightly changed. We've twiddled some land around. 300 metres, 1,000 feet above sea level, 700 mil of rain. That changes quite a lot in old money, sort of 28, 29 inches of rain. Large combinable cropped area. We also let some land out for fruit and vegetable production. And fruit and veg in a regenerative system, as you guys will know, is really challenging when you're trying to do it at scale. Everything needs to be harvested on certain days. It needs to be planted on certain days. But actually, unless you're working with these people, it's very difficult to try and drive change. And that's what we've done, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. We've got irrigation. There's 900 outdoor lambing ewes. We're a few more than that now. High tier stewardship, so that's all about conservation. We went a bit mad ticking the boxes for those options. So lots of fallow plots for skylarks, lots of lapwing plots, unharvested headlands, which we plant and then leave and basically leave for a bird seed table for the winter. Wild bird seed mixes, pollen and nectar, beetle banks, all sorts of things. And then we're a leaf demonstration farm. Leaf is, again, really important to us. Caroline was the CEO of Leaf. She died just over 2 years ago. Set the charity up in 1991, so it's just over 30 years old. And it's been a huge impact, again, on what we're trying to do. So Leaf is linking environment and farming, and it's about integrated pest management. So how can we farm in a more environmentally sustainable and friendly way? So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight as well. We're at a satellite farm for Agri-EPI, so that's engineering, precision and innovation. So things that drones fly around the sky, satellite imagery we're using to try and target our crop inputs more efficiently, more effectively. They're finite resources, so we've got to use them as wisely as we possibly can. Lots of sensors in the ground, lots of weather stations gathering data and collecting things like that. I've got a brilliant team of guys that work on the farm. 3 of them who still work on the farm went there straight from school at 16. They're all over 60 now. So there's a huge wealth of knowledge there, which enables me to be able to go out and do other things. That's going to be a challenge when they come to retire. How do we replace that next generation? So we're sort of working on that as well. We've got Hartbury student, which we've had 4 now, for an annual sandwich year with them. So they come learn what we're all about. And actually one of them came back last summer, which was really helpful for us. I'm sure lots of people have seen this photograph. Tewkesbury Abbey in 2007 in July. So we have massive challenges, and you guys are all particularly aware of that, doing what you do. Farming is at the front of that, and food production is at the front of that, and that is the challenge that we as farmers trying to run a business in this environment, but actually as customers, You guys are faced with challenges and choices as well that you need to do. So one extreme to the other, and I've got some statistics here. So the wettest day ever recorded was the 3rd of October 2020, 240 mils over that day in the UK. So records are tumbling. You'll all be very, very aware of this. May 2020, driest and sunniest ever recorded. February 2020, wettest February on record since 1766. And so on and so forth. They're all being smashed out the park at the moment. And in fact, here we are, 3rd week of November now, and it was 14 degrees driving down here. Could have had my shorts on, really. So we do have challenges. It's wet and then it's dry. So this is what I want to talk about. What is regenerative agriculture? What does it mean? And how are we doing it? Physically, practically, what does it mean on the farm? What are the benefits and then the future about where we're going? So to me, regenerative agriculture is a system of farming principles and practices which Kat brilliantly highlighted earlier on, and the groundswell tea towel, which I have in my my office at the grain store. And when we have farming groups round, very often the kettle's boiling and people are standing there looking at the tea towel, discussing it, and actually you can see their brains following that whole pattern through. So we're trying to improve biodiversity, we're improving our soil, our water, our air, and our ecosystem services. But also, in addition to that, we're enabling climate-friendly food production, because we must not forget that we need to keep producing food. We need to keep feeding people, but we need to nourish them with quality food, not just the cheap stuff that you can import from halfway around the world, exporting our footprint across the way. So this is the leaf, the integrated farm management wheel, and there are 9 different elements to that wheel, from communication, which we're talking about tonight. You've got soil health, crop, pollution, you've got waste management, nature and conservation, energy, pollution. All of those parts of the wheel all link in together. So if you manage a spoke of a bicycle tyre, bicycle wheel, they're all on there. And these are the decisions that we as farmers have to make on a daily basis. So 2013, that was when I went out around the world on my Nuffield travels. And this was not that recently. This was Oklahoma in 1930s, in the time of the Dust Bowl. 10 years of drought, bad management, but at the time that was what people knew. So everything was being cultivated. And then because it was so vast, they would just move on and then go and colonize the next bit of Oklahoma. And this was a result. Parts of America have lost 75% of their topsoil, so the top of the Mississippi Basin, in the last 125 years. Absolutely staggering. But there are things that we can do to try and change that. And this was one of my light bulb moments on my Nuffield scholarship. This was in Oklahoma, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, boiling hot, really windy, 2 farms, managed very, very differently, either side of a road. And the slide on your left-hand side is our regenerative farming man. You can see the residue in the background, the straw. So that straw is being left on the soil surface. It's being used to shield and protect the soil surface. The Americans have got this fantastic expression called soil armor, and that's exactly what it is. You can imagine that being held up to protect it from the wind, the rain, the sun. Protects the soil surface. It cools the soil, enables that biological life to function properly. The guy on the right-hand side, very, very traditional. The headers would go in, combine, and then they would just have deep ripping tractors. And you could see, because you could see for miles, 1,200 acre fields, and you could see the plumes of dust where they were doing this cultivation. And if you look at the soil structure there isn't any. It's just fine dust. So when it rained, they had 2 inches of rain just before this, that water just capped the surface, couldn't infiltrate, couldn't go in, and then it just blew away. So the guy on the left got a chance to carry on farming and plant a crop because he had moisture. So to me, it's about moisture, water management, as well as soil health. So what are we doing about this? Regen agriculture. Minimise soil disturbance, keep it covered, long and diverse rotations, and then livestock integration. So we've only got 4 principles in here. There are more, but we're just going to focus on these ones for now. So minimising soil disturbance, what does that do? This is Overbury through the years, really. So we started off, when I first went there 20 years ago, everything was ploughed, quite traditional, power harrowed, worked down from the top down. And then we slightly moved into a carriering type system, which is a name of a cultivator, but quite a light, shallow cultivation. So improved outputs, moved a bit faster across the land, didn't work it quite so deep, making strides that way. We had a retirement just after that photo was taken, and then we bought the top down, which is a sort of a one-pass trailed cultivation system, and that would just sort of follow the combine around the farm, basically. Which was great. All looked very brown, really. Don't really like brown anymore. But it had some economic advantages. So back in 2011, we could see that the economics of arable production were going to be struggling a little bit. Reduction in support payments, subsidies, BPS payments, basic premium scheme, that is. Crop prices were low. So how do we go about maintaining profitability? And that's about increasing output, efficiency, driving everything faster and faster. So we made changes along the way. So 2004, that was costing us £169 a hectare to establish a hectare of crop, a hectare of wheat, effectively. The change in systems reduced that, but it wasn't until we went into our current system of direct drilling that we massively cut down the costs of our establishment and our operation, like hugely. And that had some huge benefits as well, not just financially, but environmentally as well. So across the farmed area of about 1,400 hectares, we reduced the fuel use from 53 litres a hectare per crop established down to down to 17. That includes rolling. So we saved a huge amount of greenhouse gases. We halved the tons of CO2 equivalent in the establishment of our crops. So that has massive benefits financially, environmentally. You can see the drill there, the planting machine. A direct drill doesn't need any cultivations ahead of it to soften the soil and enable us to get the seed in the ground. It's got a big disc that chops through the soil, slices through it, and then just blows the seed in behind. So disturbance is minimum. We're relying then on the previous roots of the previous crop to make the drainage channels as they die. We're not disturbing our earthworms, and it's great that Kat and Simon were talking about earthworms. The adult earthworms are hugely important. The deep burrowing earthworms, they can go down about 2 meters. So you see those, they're acting like a set of bellows. They're pushing carbon dioxide out of the soil and then sucking oxygen back in, so it improves the soil. And they hate being cultivated, as you would. You know, you imagine in your house here, an earthquake comes through. What's that going to do to the population? And that's what we were doing when we were ploughing and doing cultivations in our field. You would every 12 months you would come round and destroy that population, and then it would gradually build up again, and then you would come round and do it again. And somebody said to me once that was very much like the earthquake in Christchurch, when they were flying in to see it, and there was just a black hole in the middle of where Christchurch used to be. Some of my New Zealand Nuffield friends. And that's what we're doing every year to our soil population, whether that's earthworms, whether that's fungi. All of these things take a long time to recover. So by not disturbing them, we're enabling that population to improve, population to build up. We're also not mineralising and oxidising the carbon in the soil. So we're not putting so much air into the soil that is pushing that carbon out into the atmosphere and disappearing. So direct drilling, great for capturing carbon. Great for water infiltration, great for costs. But direct drilling doesn't work on its own. We need to keep our soil covered. Again, a phrase that I loved in America was "don't farm naked," especially if you're in Canada, because it's pretty cold. So we don't farm naked. We cover everything up, which is very politically correct, I'm sure. So if we have a break in our cropping, in our combinable crop system for more than 5 weeks, we'll put a cover crop on there. So anything that is what we call spring cropped, so we're planting spring barley next February or March, we'll have a cover crop on there. And that, as you can see on the picture on the left here, is more soil armour. So it infiltrates, it stops the rain from hitting the soil, protects the soil. And cover crops can do a huge amount of good in the land. They're like the little Swiss Army knife in the farmer's pocket. if you like. So we can reduce our soil erosion by protecting the soil. We're reducing soil compaction by having loads of roots in that soil. Lots of different species. Diversity is really crucial. If you look at old woodland, it's not one species. It's a whole multitude of things, each one reacting differently with the soil biology and the soil populations. It helps us build soil organic matter. I'll come back to that a bit later on. It's improving soil health, encouraging all our pollinators, capturing loads of nutrients. We'll come back to that in a minute, and building fertility. We were talking about water infiltration earlier on as well. So this is us a few years ago, where we designed the 5-minute fallow. Fallow period is when there's nothing in the crop in the field that's growing. So for us, the shorter we can have the fields bare, the more important it is. And this is in the beginning of August, where you've got maximum heat, maximum light intensity, day length, so you'll get the biggest return on the investment of those seeds. The seeds might cost us £30 or £40 a hectare for an overwintered crop of cover crop, and a little bit less for a very short period of time where it's in for sort of 5 or 6 weeks. And 5-minute fallow is really, really important. So, for instance, if we can plant something at the beginning of August, we'll get about 6 tonnes a hectare of dry matter, whereas if we plant at the beginning of September, we're about 1.5 tonnes. And we've still got the same cost of seed, we've got the same cost of the tractor and the fuel and the man sitting on the seat. That's Derek on that tractor. So you're getting 4 times the return on that investment. So crucially, being organised and having the seed ready to go is all hugely important. The spend reflects the time, so the longer that cover crop is planned to be in the ground, the more money we'll spend on it. Diversity, really, really crucial. So at least 5 different species. We have legumes, we have mustards, we have a cereal, so an oat or a rye. We'll have buckwheat, we'll have maybe a bit of linseed, fodder radish, berseem clover. All these things add to the party. And I say timing is absolutely everything for doing that. And I do quite a lot of talks, or do a lot of farm walks, and people say, well, where do you get the return on that investment? So we could spend £100 a hectare on some really expensive cover crop mixes. But actually, you spend £100 a hectare and you can get back over £500 of nitrogen based just on that canopy alone. So once you start to look at the economics of the cover cropping, it really does start to add up, especially with high fertiliser prices that we had last year because of the cost of natural gas with everything going on in Russia and the Ukraine. So it's hugely important that we try to analyse everything as much as we can to be able to back the data up as we do this. I hope this is going to work now. So this is a cover crop that we planted after some hand-picked peas. And which go into the supermarket, so part of this vegetable part of the rotation. This is a 16-way species mix in here. We had sunflowers, millet, maize, lupins, radishes, mustard, berseem clover, red clover, stubble turnips, you name it. We got a bit carried away. And that's us planting the next crop into there. So that was winter barley being planted into that. That's looking down over towards Cheltenham, just round the corner there. So one pass straight into all of that, all that organic matter, which was fantastic. Pushed it all down flat, a nice protective layer, stopped the weeds growing. We did spray it off with glyphosate afterwards, which kills off all the green material. And then the next crop comes through in sort of 10 days' time, 10 days' time. So the fallow period in here was the peas, in this instance, were harvested at the beginning of July, and we weren't destined to plant the next crop until the end of September. So we had a bare element of the rotation, and I wanted to take the opportunity to capture carbon out of the atmosphere, and we can only really do that by growing plants. It removed a lot of compaction from the pea harvest, and it also is building organic matter into our soils and making them more resilient. So that's why we do it. And there are costs involved, but the benefits far outweigh them. So going back to my sort of testing, I love data and I love information, and we test every year in the springtime to work out how much nitrogen, which is our biggest contributor to our carbon footprint. Nitrogen fertilizer alone, which is a key ingredient for getting plants to grow, takes up 52% of the farm carbon footprint. It's huge. It's also really expensive. So we need to measure exactly how much we apply, and we use loads of different techniques to look at that. But the first one is soil mineral nitrogen testing. So at the end of January, beginning of February, we'll go and we'll put probes in the soil, take some samples away from 0 to 90 centimetres, get that analysed. We analyse what's in the crop, so what that crop's already taken out of the soil. And then the AAN bit, which is the potentially available nitrogen. So they basically put it in an incubator and say over time, i.e. the spring and early summer, how much nitrogen is going to be released from the organic matter of the soil. You add all that together and then you can start to look at how much you need to apply. We've got sensors on the sprayer that measure the green area index, so the amount of biomass that the crop has, and then it alters the amount of fertilizer that it gives it as it's driving along. We also have lots of testers that we can go and measure the chlorophyll. So we actually test the leaves of the plants before we apply fertilizer so that we know that we're not wasting any. Because not only is it expensive, it's not great for carbon, it's also not great for water if it gets into watercourses. So we need to be really, really careful and responsible with it. So in addition to inorganic nitrogen, so bought-in nitrogen fertilizer, we're trying to use a lot more natural sources as well. Legumes are crucial in that. So part of the rotation, peas and beans, but also the cover crops. Lots of lupins, lots of red clover, lots of berseem clover, and lots of vetches. All of those things to try and do this in a much more nature-friendly way. This is a radish, the big long, the big deep one, the one on the left. I did a talk once for the Real Oxford Farming Conference, which was in January, and I went to the field and I pulled up a radish, and it went down 80 centimetres in a straight line, and it was like a big stream of spaghetti. It sort of went as it came out, and I thought that's brilliant because it means that I've got no compaction for 80 centimetres, and even if I did have compaction down there, nothing I can do about it because I haven't got a machine that can go in that deep to do anything about it. So that was really positive. So radishes. Really deep rooting, great for removing compaction. We chop nearly all of our straw. We do sell a little bit of straw, but then we do a straw for muck deal with a neighbour, and we get his farmyard manure back. And then the one on the right-hand side there, that's a sunflower root. So it just shows you just two completely different plants, different rooting structures. The sunflower holding the soil together, very little holding on the radish, but compaction removal. So having that all in a mix is really, really important. And then we use lots of manures. We've got livestock grazing stubble turnips. We've got the residue, and then the cover crops. All of these things are there to protect the soil and keep it nice and healthy. And then we've also got a range of crops that we grow. So we try not to grow the same crop in the same field for 2 years on the trot. So this is the rotation. We've got oilseed rape. We've got wheat. We've got linseed. We've got peas in here. And then there's also, we've tried soya beans. We've tried quinoa or quinoa if you shop in Waitrose, and various other things, but they don't grow particularly well in this country. We don't get enough heat units, so we need to do a little bit of plant breeding to try and improve that. But homegrown sources of protein are really, really important. If you have heard of Hodmedods over in where they sort of Suffolk direction. UK company doing lots of pulses, lots of lentils. Lots of those crops tend to be grown in the east where it's drier, rather than the wetter west country over here. This is the other bit that's been quite an eye-opener on this journey, is the livestock integration. So how can we get the livestock, the golden hoof, across as much of our arable fields as we possibly can, turning organic green matter material into plant food, basically. So they're depositing the contents of their guts, shall we say, on the field, which is an organic matter source, but it's also got biology in there as well. So the gut bacteria, really, really crucial, and that all helps build up that sort of healthier soil. So the sheep are mostly grazing permanent pasture. We've got 307 hectares of permanent grass, about 70 hectares of herbal lays. They're grazing about 300 hectares of cover crops, 60 hectares of turnips and vetch, and then something else which we've been developing for the last couple of years, which is this understory of clover. And this is something that I think is going to be potentially quite a game changer for us. We've gone into it in quite a big way. We've got 5% of the arable land down to this now, which is a micro clover, so a very small leaved clover. Clover being legume fixes nitrogen. And basically we want to try and keep that growing in the field for 5, 6, 7, 10, 20, 40, 50 years. We won't get it that long, I'm sure. But the idea of this is to have a living mulch, so you've got something growing on that soil all the time. Because it's leguminous, it's fixing nitrogen out of the atmosphere that can then feed the wheat crop, so we don't need to put so much nitrogen fertiliser on. And as a result of this, we're using about half the bought-in nitrogen fertiliser that we used to do, with no impact on the yields. It's also got soil armour all the time, so the soil is protected from heavy winter rainfall. And it's also a sheep food that's already established. So as soon as the combine's gone through, we take the wheat straw off. Chop the wheat straw, take the grain off, and then a month or so later, the clover has grown again, and we can put the sheep straight on there. So we're saving some of our cover cropping costs, and it's a really high protein feed for pasture-fed lamb, if you want any. It's really good stuff. So great for reducing fertiliser, reducing our chemicals, because herbicides are being reduced because we've got competition from the clover, stopping weeds growing. It's improving soil health, and it's building climate resilience into our system. We're also grazing wheat crops and barley crops, so again quite an old traditional practice. This was some regrowth after about 4 days after the sheep came out. So that's reducing the amount of leaves that we've got. And in the winter, you tend to get disease build up on those leaves. So the fact that the sheep are removing that contamination means we can reduce our fungicides. And we've cut that down by about 50% now. It's also, the saliva on the sheep is really important, both to stimulate sort of growth and root growth. So we're reducing our reliance on plant growth regulators, which help keep the stems stiffer and standing up for the combine. And it's helping to reduce the weeds, although sometimes I think the hoof prints actually do create a little bit of weed, so we've just got to watch that a little bit. And this is the sort of residue that you can see. This was the same field that we had where the video was filmed, with that same cover crop on there. So you can see the armour still in place. This was taken in January, after it was planted the previous September. So then what does that effect have on our soil organic matter? Because organic matter is the crucial element that over time we've been burning out of our soil with chemicals and cultivation. So we've got 3 different soil types here, and these are the results from our soil mineral nitrogen sampling. And each one of those has gone up by 1.7% over this 7-year of testing period, which is a 0.2% per year increase. And in 2015, the Paris Climate Change Conference said that if all the arable soils in the world could increase by 0.1%, we would be able to reduce climate change or reverse the climate change that's going on at the moment. So with all of these things, direct drilling, rotation, reducing our chemicals and our fertilisers, we're actually having a pretty significant input on or impact on our organic matter levels, which is really important. So then what does the future involve? So the future involves a lot more of this. I love this picture. This was in a cover crop of oats and beans when we were first starting off. Actually, it's a video, and to see the aphid sort of squirming as it was being eaten was actually really rather satisfying. I hate aphids. They carry all sorts of viruses, and then they're not great. But it's it's just a sign that integrated pest management can really work. So we're not using any insecticides on the farm anymore, because we're relying on more of these little guys to help us out and do some of the controlling for us. And then the new things that are coming along the line, we're looking at sort of carbon footprinting the farm, the enterprises that we have, and actually how we can look at potentially monetizing some of that carbon. There are a whole range of carbon calculators out there. There's over 70 that farmers can use. And this is part of the challenge that we have, is finding the right carbon calculator to give us the most accurate position from our carbon sequestration and emissions as we possibly can. So we're working on that. We're also working on a lot of biodiversity stuff. So what does this impact have, both financially on our soils, but then also on the wider biodiversity as well? I'm going to have a little quiz. So all of you Twitchers out there, I'm going to go for the left-hand side one. You're quite good, aren't you? But I will find you out, don't worry. Middle one. Top right. Oh, yes. Bottom right. I think it was a It's a little bunting. Which since 1918, only 248 have been rung in the UK. We had one on the farm 2 Januaries ago. So this to me, we've been working with the West Midland bird ringers for about the last 4 years now. We're doing a lot of thermal imagery, so using thermal cameras to go and catch skylark, woodcock, owls, all sorts of things around the farm. Sex them, weigh them, age them, ring them, and then record them. This is my youngest daughter when she was about 9, coming out ringing with us there, and these were the birds that we caught and we rung that year. And this to me really sums up what it's all about, actually, because we're able to produce a lot of good, healthy food as well as building the environment and strengthening the resilience of that environment. Lots of red list species in here, and this recording is going on from strength to strength. Paul from the West Midland Bird Ringers, who was up the other night, he caught over 60 just on one session ringing with his thermal stuff as well. Woodcock and skylark are just, you're kind of tripping over the things really, which is really, really good. And then we're also taking that into another sector, I guess, is to how we can directly market regeneratively produced products to a much wider audience. So one thing I'm passionate about is the fact that we need to have a more nutritionally dense food supply for the masses of people that we have on the planet. And we can't do that with sort of organics. So we need to be looking at regenerative produce to be able to do that. So set up a company with 4 of the guys, or 3 of the guys here and me, to actually look at how we can do that. So Green Farm Collective, you're on social media channels and things, is really interesting. So in terms of where we go in the future, so nitrogen fertilizer, bad for carbon, bad for the environment, we need to use less of it. So that's what we're trying to do. We need to use more biological inputs as well. So how can we use more composts, more compost teas, more manures? For that we need livestock, particularly ruminants. Cows are really important. We haven't really talked about mob grazing. Kat mentioned it earlier on, and Simon did. Mob grazing is hugely important for carbon sequestration, for biodiversity and different species within the grass fields. So organic applications really important. Livestock integration. So we've got the sheep at the moment. We're looking at cattle to come in, and as addition to those, that comes with its own risks and challenges. Bovine TB being the main one. We need to keep going on that one. Agroforestry. Again, we're just planning 2 agroforestry fields, so 20 hectares of in-field trees, strips of trees that our arable operations can go within. So sort of like alleys of wheat and barley, and then fruit trees in between. And also browsing for animal health, so anthelmintics, so the sheep can sort of self-medicate and things like that. Carbon and biodiversity opportunities as well going further forward. And then I just wanted to leave you with this, because to me this kind of sums up how rubbish we are as a population, but also the things we need to focus on. Upon the handful of soil our survival depends. Husband it and it will grow our food, our fuel and our shelter, and surround us with its beauty. Abuse it and the soil will collapse and die, taking humanity with it. And that was a Sanskrit text, which is Indian, from quite a long time ago. And we still haven't really appreciated exactly where we need to be. But I think we're getting there. Regenerative agriculture is a huge step forward that can be scaled up to massively bring this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. That was absolutely fascinating run through everything that's going on Overbury. I feel we probably only scratched the surface, but it was a great scratching that you did. So thank you very much. So can we bring a couple of chairs up and we can start a Q&A session? While everybody thinks about questions, can I ask one? Would any of you ever think about going organic? And if not, why not?
Really good question. To me, there's a reason why organic still remains 1.8% of the whole market in the UK. And I think organic is great. You can't knock the sentiment of not wanting to use any kind of artificial inputs. But the production in terms of calories that you get from that particular land mass is not sustainable enough to feed everybody that we need to feed. So somewhere along the lines, some targeted interventions is where we need to go to kind of optimise, not maximise, but optimise the production that we can get.
Yeah, so as at Puddleditch, we probably could quite easily convert to organic. I think one of the main reasons we wouldn't go down that route is the time to convert, and on a 10-year tenancy, it's just not, you wouldn't get that money back. Equally, with the amount of direct selling we're doing, it's not necessarily the stickers we can put on our products, it's hopefully more the stories we can tell, in that I know our product could be sold as organic, in that we would be ticking a lot of those boxes, but it's more that paperwork background that we wouldn't have the time or the finances to tick. From a veterinary point of view, I think organics done well can be very beneficial, but unfortunately a lot of the decision making can also have impacts on welfare when we're looking at it from an animal production point of view. So I think that's something to be quite careful about from the organics situation, in that we're currently doing a lot of no organics at all, milk being produced and being made into milk powders, mainly sold over to the States, and they're sort of different. They have different ways in that they sort of counter their organics over there, and it's a real challenge from an animal welfare point of view.
So, the question, where does genetically modified seed come into regenerative agriculture? So there's the new technique called sort of gene editing, where they can specifically take genes, switch genes on and off to get different traits. I'm not sure that is the way forward. We grow, and we didn't really talk about it at all, lots of blends of wheat. So we're using a mixed population within the field to try and build disease resistance, so the whole variety doesn't all go down with one thing at any one time. So I think we'd have to be very, very careful how it's marketed and how our customers perceive that change. We tried it in 1991, and we're still living with the consequences of how that kind of was probably mishandled. So it's not something that I'd be keen to do at the moment. I think we've got enough techniques and enough solutions without that as an addition.
But what I would say is it takes a long time for biodiversity to develop, and it takes a very short time to lose it. Highlighted with David Attenborough's Planet Earth last week, I think, when a tree was cut down. I nearly cried my eyes out. And the loss of habitat, the loss can be so quick when we damage things, but it takes a long time to bring things back. And really, seed genetics is just a way of helping to speed things up. That's what it is, really.
Yeah, great question. It was so on the scale that we've got. Are there areas of land that we can tap into? Oh, sorry. To BNG, biodiversity net gain. So most of our poorer bits of land we've already put into stewardship schemes. So it's where we tend to put the pollen and nectar, the grass margins, either on the north side of a wood that gets shaded. So of our overall land use, we've got just over 12% set aside for sort of environmental stewardship. So it's a significant area. We are looking at planting more. I've got some woodland planted or planned to plant this year. And I think biodiversity net gain is something that we'll look at very, very closely. I'm slightly wary because it's a sort of a 30-year commitment. So we're into generational succession planning as well to make sure Penelope's son George, who's taking over in 4.5 years' time, is on board with all that sort of thing. So yes, so we're on it, but it's something that we're just not rushing into. I think markets are going to develop. I think they're going to develop in the carbon world because as we get closer to 2050, farmers have the solutions to be able to capture carbon, and I think that carbon value is going to go up. So we don't want to necessarily lock in too early. So yeah, kind of watching brief really. Yeah, so the question was, are we finding resistance to this new regenerative style of agriculture, I guess? Less so now. I was just saying to Belle, actually, when I first came back from my Nuffield scholarship 10 years ago, you opened the Farmers Weekly, there was very rarely an article about direct drills, cover cropping, mob grazing, anything like that. And now it's all over the place. McCain have got adverts on the television for regeneratively produced potatoes, which I'm not sure how you do that. In terms of soil, the first principle is minimise the soil disturbance. And what do you do with a potato? You ridge it and de-stone it and knock 7 bales out of all the worms. So there's things to go. Farmers learn from farmers, and there are a lot more of us doing that now. So from the top of Breeden Hill, I know of 5 direct drills that are all running now on my neighbours' farms. There weren't any when we first started. So driving around the country, I see a lot more cover crops. I see a lot more sheep grazing, cattle grazing, cover crops. So it is changing. I think we're also very traditional. So what father did and what grandfather did is still applicable today, and I don't know necessarily that it is. That's partly because we're in a maritime climate, so these changes and these reductions and depletions of our soil happen very slowly, whereas in America it's 10 years, boom, and that is very, very visible to those farmers. I think it's less so over here, so it's a slower collapse, and I think that's the challenge, because at the moment there are an awful lot of people that say it's not happening, there's nothing wrong with what we've been doing, bearing in mind they're probably ploughing with a 400 horsepower tractor now, and in the 1960s, 70s it was a 60 horsepower tractor. So that tells you one thing, in its own right.
Yeah, I guess mine was from a different angle, maybe, of the national age of most farmers is 65 plus. Trying to get new ideas and new people onto farms, I think, is the key way a lot of these messages is going to get there. And the government is trying to think of new entrance schemes and different ways of helping sort of land management change through the generations, or try and get new people with maybe more open ideas to get onto the farms. But we know how difficult it was. So for Puddleditch, there was over 140 people applying for that application. So it is a real difficult step to get onto the ladder, and I think a lot of those people would be really open-minded to doing different things, but to try and get that land to start with is one of the big hurdles, I think.
When you're fresh out of agricultural college or back from exploring the world and coming back to the family farm, you're still young. It's not your farm at that time. Farmers don't like to let go very quickly and hand down the farm, and so naturally you take on your father's, your uncle's, your grandfather's ways of farming, and you start by probably farming wrong. We've been very lucky to be able to go off on our own and start in our own way, but both my brothers will farm the same way as my dad farmed. So, and it's just the nature of the environment, really. But farmers are huge innovators, and we adjust and adapt all the time. And this is coming to the forefront, and our parents are seeing the benefits of regenerative. And I think we're all starting to understand it. We need to educate the wider public to it, to support the farmers better by more seasonal buying, more direct farm buying, and not wanting every convenience under the sun from around the world, because all of that has huge carbon footprint that we all have to answer for, really.
I think one of the reasons we definitely went into it was actually it's a way of farming with lower inputs. So actually we are less held to what that nitrogen price might be next year, in that it is very variable. and I can't see that changing and ever coming back to the levels it is, probably from a good point, from an environmental point of view. So I think actually regenerative can be, if your mindset's in the right place, it can be seen as actually a way of lessening your reliance on it, but I think you have to be aware of that to start with.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that totally. It's taking a little bit of the destiny into our own hands, that we're not, servanted to the petrochemical industry, which is what supplies and has kept everybody going since, solutions were delivered in a can. So, yeah, we've still got a long way to go, but definitely going the right way. So BPS is being reduced. Sustainable farming incentive, the SFI, is sort of coming in to replace some of that. That's probably going to replace, between that and our top-up stewardship, will replace about 60% of our BPS. So it's not going to give us the same level of income. So Simon's right, we do need to innovate. We need to look at different markets, hence the Green Farm Collective. Can we get a greater premium for the products that we are supplying into more mainstream channels, and get a bigger chunk of that back to the farm? Penelope is not keen on doing a farm shop. We've had that discussion on and off for 20 years, and I've finally realised it's not going to happen. So we need to look at other alternatives, other marketing streams. We've got, so for the business, there's properties, rentals. We've got a nursery school. There's a shoot. There's a forestry department. So actually, that diversification is all part of that as well. That business resilience, really. So looking at solar on the grain store roof. Lots of different things. Fruit juices. We're pressing our own fruit. We're not pressing it, but we're growing apples now and making fruit juice. So all these sorts of things kind of add to that whole story. But for us, we're a commodity grower. I grow 8,000 tons worth of stuff. I can't retail all of that, but if I can get that into the mainstream, supermarket supply chain and get some of that premium back to us, then that's probably where we need to go, as opposed to a farm shop and vending machines, which is brilliant, but it's not for us. I did mention glyphosate because it's a really key part of our story, because without glyphosate we wouldn't be able to do all of the stuff we're doing. Glyphosate basically kills off all the greenery. We used to use it in our conventional system. So we would go and do all the cultivations, and then we would wait for weeds to grow. We'd spray them off with glyphosate once or twice, and then we'd plant our crop in there. And then we also used to spray glyphosate to desiccate the crop. So about a week, 10 days before harvest, you go and spray a little bit more on, and that would kill the crop. It would dry it. So we would use less fuel in the dryer. So everything is everything has a reaction and an interaction with other things. So for us, a spray of glyphosate before we plant the crop kills off all the cover crops, kills off all the weeds. Means we can use less herbicides within the crop. Without that, we would have to go back to cultivations for weed control. And for me, in our soils, with our slopes and our kind of altitude and the soil types that we have, we would get then more soil erosion, which we used to have. We've eliminated soil erosion farming this way now. Most of our erosion actually comes off our farm tracks rather than off the fields now. So yes, we do use it. We use less than we used to use, and we're always looking to reduce what we do use, but it is an integral part of it. Which is, it's a bit of a challenge. I know people have, different ideas about glyphosate and the effect on people and the environment. But for me, it's the lesser of the evils that we would have to use as an alternative. It is part of the journey, and it's things like the cover crops. If we graze them with the sheep, we're reducing the volume of crop that we need to kill so we can lower our rates. It's about using citric acid and fulvic acid in the mix so that we can lower the pH and we can buffer the effect on the soil health with molasses and fermented molasses and fulvic acid. So yes, we're using it, but we're reducing the impact that we have. And actually, Tim Parton, who's one of the farmers, if you're in social media, look up Tim Parton, fascinating farmer up in Staffordshire. He's done is doing a huge study on the effect of glyphosate on soil biology. So treatments with and without, and then looking at that impact, and the results of that are going to be out very, very soon. So that's going to be quite interesting to see what effect that has.
If you were talking to a conventional farmer and you were giving them one piece of advice because they were thinking about going down the regenerative road, what would it be before they start? What do they need to think about?
Should have done it 10 years ago.
Love it. Do you want
Mine would be, it's a step to take to be more in control of your inputs.
Mine would be allow the next generation to take on the farm early enough so you can enjoy the benefits yourself.